So the concept of this particular period is thinking about what is the next era and how are we going to change. But the problem is this, changing from one era to the other. This is where yes, but comes in. Yes, that would be great, but what it means is that we will have to stop doing some things that we like to do, that we need to do, that are part of this era before we can start doing new things. Joseph Schumpeter called it the waves of creative destruction. It should have been destructive creativity because destruction happens first and creativity happens second. If you want a new kitchen, you first got to tear out the old one. If you want a new house, you first got to sell the old one. All of these, if you want to build a new road, you first got to tear up the old one. If you want a new system, if you want a new period in your policy, you first have to get out of doing the old one. And in that sense, it's very difficult to get people to agree to take in the short-term hit in order to get the long-term benefit. It's like an investment. But as you know, investments are not guaranteed. There's risk. You might tear out that kitchen and the contractor go broke. You might sell your car and not have enough money to buy a new one. So so when people resist change, when they resist going into the new era, they're not being, quotes, unreasonable. They're not being resistant. They're saying, well, I don't know that I'm ready for that. And that's where the timing comes in. There is a time that's too early, indeed, just as there's a time that's too late. So finally then, what does the new era look like? A concept that Adam's colleague Peter Senge shared with us in the fifth discipline is the concept of a mental model. We all carry around in our heads a way the world works. And when that thing flips, when we see the world in a new way, that's when we have entered, psychologically at least, into the new era. And you're looking out in your research, and you're playing in the sandbox of your steep category for where those new ideas might be. Where are things that when we flip the mind, everything changes? I'll tell you, in my own case, it had to do with education, of course. Like I said, I've been a teacher all my life. What's a university for? What's a school for? Well, it's for teaching, of course. Not of course. Early on in the 1990s, we had a faculty discussion group about what the university was about, and I flipped to the fact that it wasn't teaching, it was learning. That one word change changed the whole mental model of my concept of the university, because who is the center of the teaching university? The faculty. And who is the center of the learning university? The student. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was important still, but I wasn't the center. Because people learn in all kinds of different ways. They learn from each other, they learn from the world, et cetera, et cetera. And it completely revised my whole approach to my career, which I'd already been doing for 20 or 30 years.
Question for you, Peter. Sometimes the changes are changes where you don't have any control over them. Like the Austro-Hungarian Empire went through kind of a disruptive period, and they really didn't appreciate it. What balance, like this, we can be talking about disruptions that we can't control and disruptions we can control. Is that what I understand the rules of engagement are here?
Well, that's the outside-inside. There's inbound change, which are disruptions that you have no influence whatsoever. It's like sit down at the card table, you're dealt a hand, you can't say, I don't like this hand, I want another one. No, you don't have another one, you got to play the one you have. Then disruptions that you can control are basically new policies. What I learned yesterday in talking to you all is that policy change is never continuous. Policy change is always a leap forward, and therefore it requires tremendous energy of issues and needs and politics and power and money, because it's up against a resistance barrier because we don't want to change, and then whoop, it all leaps ahead. Those are the disruptions. Now, to say that you can control them, maybe in the main, of course, the government can make any policy it wants, but you as an individual, even your department, and even interests within the government can't control anything. I don't talk about control of the future, I talk about influence. So it's persistent pressure towards a change over time, but then all of a sudden, boom, the thing gets passed, the immigration policy goes, and here we are, now we're in a new era. So I appreciate that, Harv, that's great. Yes, sir.
Let's go back to mic number 2.
Hi, thanks for that. That was great. I guess I'm curious about
Where do you think the concept of progress fits into all this? I had my own click a while ago where I realized that the concept of progress is actually new to human society, and it's not necessarily a given that things are always going to get bigger, better, and faster. And unfortunately, not everyone else has that click, and so I can't always talk about it with people. So I'm curious where do you think that fits in, and where, like, talking about future outside of progressing to a better world necessarily to just a different world?
Right. Now that's a great question, and I appreciate that. I teach a course in social change, and progress is the first driver, the first shape of change that we cover. But of course, progress requires a set of values, and you have to always ask progress for whom and on what criterion. Is economic growth progress, or is it destroying the environment? Is multicultural growth, tolerance progress, or are we losing our way of life? Is urbanization progress, or are we giving up the heartland of our ancestors, et cetera, et cetera? So what I find is that most changes are progress to some, but they're not progress to all. And that's, of course, where the debate and the discussion about policy comes in, because policy is supposed to make things better. And it's intended to do that. I doubt there's ever a policy to intentionally make things worse, but oftentimes it does make things worse for some people, because one of the things I didn't say is that in the new era, and every policy is to some extent a new era, a new regulatory era, a new taxation era, whatever, everybody changes positions. Their positions are different. So those who are enhanced and benefited by the policy, of course, love it, and they call it progress, and those who may be disadvantaged by the policy are not, and that's why we have the debate and the discussion.
Yes, I'm curious as to what sort of frameworks are used to look at what happens when something goes from below the radar to above the radar. And I know we sort of maybe ran out of time to go through all the slides, or maybe you're going to go through them later, but one of the slides that you have is on the frameworks to forecast. I'm wondering if maybe you can flip to that and go through some of that, or whether or not you can tell us a little bit about the frameworks.
No, don't go away. We'll have a little dialogue here. In what area are you in? You told me.
International trade.
International trade. So, okay. Is that a big agenda item on the Canadian government agenda right now? International trade, and you're in the soft lumber area, right?
Softwood lumber now and again sometimes becomes a big agenda item.
Okay, so it's above the line, right? What was the event that popped it above the line?
Confederation.
Which one?
Confederation.
The Federation.
Confederation. That's when
Oh,
Canada
okay. All right, so you've been in that era for a long time. Right.
Almost 150 years, right?
All right. Well, let me ask you, is there an event that could drop it below the line again?
The United States not misapplying its laws.
Okay. Now, obviously, I don't know software lumber as well as Micah does, but that's an example of an era. So you're in the middle of an era right now. It had a beginning. It's a big issue. It will there's no issue that will stay on the agenda forever. Now, it may be a long time, but it won't stay on. Now, where do we come up with these framing events? This is where the imagination comes in. Somebody out there may have written an article or a blog or some kind of Twitter thing that says this, and you pick that up and you go, wow, I'm wondering if that's not important. That's a weak signal. There's a weak signal out there saying, a weak signal, is like a little radio thing which you're trying to discern behind the background noise. The background noise is basically the CNN, Fox News, CBC, USA Today, blah, 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 where's that weak signal that's saying this is really important for change? So in your area, you would be listening for things that might create a framing event that either stops or substantially changes that issue.